why you're considering desktop virtualization, different desktop virtualization types, so on and so forth. But before I get into that, what I want to do is talk a little bit about the state of virtualization. Where are we trying to get to? Because eventually we're trying to get somewhere with all this virtualization. Now I know some of you have a sensitivity to the word cloud computing. So do I. Because cloud computing, when it first started, when we first started using the term, it was just a fluff word. It really didn't mean anything. It had no structure, nothing. Today, cloud computing is more defined. It has a structure. We know what we're talking about when we talk about cloud computing. So what are we doing in 2010? So in 2010, after the virtualization mania and the fever started to settle down, everybody's doing virtualization, and we're all good with that. Now we're starting to look at virtualizing tier 1 applications, your Exchange, your SQL, your Oracle, so on and so forth. We're starting to look at how we can virtualize those. Can they be virtualized? Will they operate properly? Etc., etc. A lot of companies started to look at VDI. We started to look at how we can leverage virtualization in a VCDR. And that was a major playing factor for adopting virtualization. Now, as 2010 started to move on, we started to look at virtualization and say, well, great, we virtualized, we're saving some money on CapEx, but how do I streamline my operations? How do I get better as far as provisioning these servers, as far as orchestration, automation? I want to be able to give users self-service portals. I don't want to have to provision a virtual machine every time a developer comes up. I want to be able to have that developer go to a website, put in a request. I need a virtual machine that has 4 gig of memory. I need a virtual machine with so-and-so processors, and I need it for a certain amount of time. It goes through a process of approval. You approve that, and they get their virtual machine, they use it for 30 days, for 60 days, for 6 months, whatever the case might be. And then after the period ends, if they don't renew the lease, it auto self-destructs. That helps you with VM sprawl. So those are some of the things that we started to look at in the latter half of 2010. We started to look at client hypervisors, application virtualization. How do we integrate physical and virtual management? How do we manage our physical environment and our virtual environment? Because now we have a hybrid. So all of that stuff started to come. But what's beyond that? What are we trying to get to? We are trying to get to the point where IT gets out of the business of building and managing data centers and everything is in the cloud. And what I mean by that is utility computing. It's the same way you pay for your electricity. You turn on the switch, you expect electricity to be there. Why should we be building data centers? Who here agrees with me that in 10 years, very, very few of us will be building data centers? You agree? Oh, cool. A lot of hands are awesome. So the idea is if we can get to a very highly virtualized, very automated infrastructure, why would I need to build a data center? Why would I need to worry about capacity planning? Why do I have to worry about servers and so on and so forth, desktops? With the advent of converged infrastructures from HP and IBM and Dell and Hitachi and Cisco, all of these people are starting to do converged infrastructures where you're able to automate and orchestrate your resources from the compute resources all the way up to a complete virtual machine. That's the first step towards private cloud. We're going to start looking at how we can intermingle private clouds and public clouds on the journey to getting to a full public cloud. Desktop virtualization fits into that strategy. We're trying to position ourselves to get to that point as well. So it's all about operational efficiencies and operational cost savings moving forward. Now, desktop virtualization. Why are you considering desktop virtualization? The number one reason everyone is considering desktop virtualization today, or most of you are considering desktop virtualization today, is Windows 7. Let's face it, Windows XP is dead. I still have to convince Dan that the Windows XP that's running on his laptop needs to be upgraded. But other than that, Windows XP is dead. Microsoft will support it through 2015 at a premium cost. But the problem with supporting Windows XP, and users like Dan, if they were a user, if he was the IT manager at a corporation, you have your users going into a Best Buy today and buying a laptop or a desktop with Windows 7 in August 2010. And they're starting to try to share these files between office use and home use, and now they're forcing you to make the upgrade because the files that they're using aren't compatible with the software that you had in the office. So that's forcing your hand as well. So with that being said, some other people are looking at it from a cost savings perspective. We're up on a desktop hardware refresh cycle. Other companies have more noble causes like Green IT, and that's great. Others are looking at it as, well, Well, we're up against Windows 7, we're up against the desktop hardware refresh. How do I do things better? How do I do things a little smarter? Can I save on CapEx? Can I save on OpEx? Where are my cost savings? A lot of companies are starting to entertain the idea of bring your own PC. I'm going to give the users $500, $600. Go out and buy whatever PC you want. As long as it's got 2 years support on it, I don't care. What are the challenges with that? We're going to talk about that. How do I integrate with cloud? We want to get to the cloud computing in the end. How does my desktop virtualization or desktop strategy help me integrate with cloud computing? User experience and user management obviously is a big issue, and we'll talk about those in the next slides as well. But what are the different types of desktop virtualizations that are available? So VDI is the most popular. That's when you, in other words, it's server-hosted virtual machines. It's kind of like terminal server, but instead of having a session connect to a server, now you have a dedicated virtual machine that's also running on a server. So it's another form of server-based computing. You have terminal server, that's a traditional desktop virtualization approach. We'll talk about pros and cons of that in the next slides. Client hypervisors are a big, big deal. Both type 1 and type 2. We'll go into that. Application virtualization and where do you cross the line. But before you can determine which users are going to use what type of technology, there's one thing I want to tell you. There is nothing that's black and white here. There's no one technology that's going to solve everyone's problem. There's no one technology that you can choose and say, well, I'm going to just adopt VDI and give VDI to everything. There's always going to be exceptions. Don't forget, this is a desktop. There's always an exception in the desktop. So the first step should be profiling the users. What types of users do I have in the environment? I have regular task users that are just using Microsoft Office applications, Internet Explorer, so on and so forth. Those require a certain type of desktop virtualization type. Then you have your mobile users all the way. Then you have client hypervisors. How do you use those? How do I leverage streaming technology in order to give users a rich experience if I want to continue to buy physical desktops? Can I continue to buy physical desktops yet gain some of the advantages of desktop virtualization from a centralization standpoint, from a management standpoint, operational standpoint, so on and so forth? There's significant changes. And you'll see that application virtualization is playing across the board. So application virtualization is going to be used regardless of what type of technology you're adopting. We'll talk about how we do that. One thing I want to stress here is that server virtualization and desktop virtualization are not the same. Server virtualization or desktop virtualization is not a mini to server virtualization. You can't take virtual machines, put them on a server, and just give users access to them from a one-to-one perspective, because you're going to have a lot of issues with storage, with support, and you're really not doing anything. You're moving the desktop from being a physical desktop at the desk, putting it in the data center. There's no cost savings there. The other thing I want to talk about, and again, we're going to go into more details about that as the slides progress, there's really not a lot of CapEx savings in desktop virtualization. We can play with the numbers as much as we want, but there's not a lot of CapEx savings. But we want to take a look and see what is the ratio of CapEx to OpEx spend when it comes to desktop virtualization. There's always an exception with a desktop. That's why it's difficult to select one type of desktop virtualization and say, I'm going to do that across the board. Your CFO, your CEO, your CIO, your manager is always going to come by and say, give Alex this application, or give Lucy this application, or give so on and so forth, something that is different from everybody else. And it's going to be hard for you guys to say no. So you always have to cater to this. So desktop virtualization is much more difficult, much more complicated than server virtualization. But one thing I want to throw out there before we continue to do this is desktop management today in the physical world an easy task? Who would say it's an easy task? Awesome. Because I've been in this industry for a long time. And there's one thing I know, desktops are annoying. Users are annoying. I don't want to deal with them. I don't want to touch them. Nothing. If I can avoid them, I can. But users are what keep the company going, right? I mean, they are the most important asset of an organization. But they're so distributed that they don't really make a very big impact when a desktop goes down as opposed to when a server goes down. But we got to pay attention to desktops. They are important. Bring your own PC. A lot of companies are entertaining this model. Bring your own PC, choose your own PC, select it, whatever. There There are challenges with that. How do I deal with that? It's not enough to say, hey, here's $600, $700, $800